Dear friends of books and voices of revelation, welcome to the narration of the following audio book. How to know God's will is of interest to the person, not the technique. By Watchman. God's children can and should know the will of God. The knowledge of God's will relates to the person, it has nothing to do with technique. When the Lord draws men, some are drawn by their intellect, some are moved by their emotions, and still others by their will. The will is generally the means God uses least to draw men. Many love the truths of the Bible. They desire to know more of these truths. And they hope that others can be edified by them. They spend hours studying the Bible and are versed in Bible studies. When they cannot interpret a passage, they become frustrated. When they think they can interpret a passage, they become glad. Such people approach the Bible only with their mind. They do not necessarily lead a proper Christian life. Admittedly, it is difficult to lead a genuine Christian life without using the mind. But those who only have an intellectual understanding of doctrines do not experience the proper Christian life. There is another group of people who are not so bright, they are not very well versed, but they have a lot of zeal. They laugh and cry with ease. They carry their emotions with them. When they touch the Bible, they are easily moved. They labor only when they feel something burning within them. In their zeal, they preach to everyone they meet and do not stop even if they become hoarse. Wherever they go, they carry with them an air of emotion, but when their zeal fades, not even 10 people could move them an inch. Such people have a strong soul. They can be easily stirred, and they can stir many when their hearts are on fire. They may cry or laugh with others, but when the tide of their emotions subsides, they cannot lead anyone to the Lord. They touch others with their emotionality. When they are in high spirits, they think well of themselves, but when they cool down, nothing will move them to take action. Such Christians are of no use to the Lord. Suppose a man has a clear mind before the Lord, balanced emotions, good knowledge of the Bible, and a zeal to serve others. All these things are wonderful, but if the Lord has never touched him, he cannot properly serve God. He needs God to touch his will. If a man's spirit is dead before the Lord, such an individual is useless to God, his spirit needs to be regenerated. We thank the Lord, because our spirit has been renewed and regenerated. This spirit is our inner man. Every believer has received the life of God in his spirit. The same spirit that dwelt in Paul also dwells in a weak brother. If we are of the Lord, the new creation that we have in our spirit, the inner man will be the same as in others, for God is no respecter of persons. However, when the inner man expresses the life of the Lord, great differences can be seen, which are related to man's natural constitution. The mind, the emotional part, and the will are the natural faculties of man, while the Holy Spirit, who dwells within him, and his regenerated spirit have become the new man, the inner man. However, a person still has an outer man, the old man, the natural man. The outer man is related to sin. The old man was terminated at the cross, but the life of the old creation still remains. Since the inner man can only be expressed through the outer man, the expressions and manifestations are different in different people. The inner life is hindered by the outer man. Therefore, the outer man must come to an end. Otherwise, there will always be obstacles that prevent man from serving the Lord. God puts an end to the outer man. In order for the saved and regenerated person to express the life of the Lord, he needs to take 2 steps. The first is to believe, which is to receive the new life, and the second is to consecrate oneself, which is to give the Lord one's outer self so that the new life may be expressed. It is like having a house surrounded by a piece of land. We can think of the house as the inner man, and the land surrounding it as the outer man. If the house belongs to one person and the land to another, there will be problems. Therefore, as soon as a man believes, he must consecrate his life to the Lord. Consecration consists in giving our outer man to the Lord, so that it belongs to him, just as the inner man does. Many believers have not yet made up their minds. When asked if they are saved, they say yes. But even though they are saved, their outer man has never been touched. The inner life they have is limited in its inability to express itself. Therefore, we must not simply believe in the Lord and remain at the stage of being saved and regenerated. We must also consecrate our outer man to the Lord. If a man is willing to consecrate his mind, his affective part, and his will to the Lord, he will express the life of the Lord. The problem we see today is that, although many have consecrated themselves, they do so at their own whim. They consecrate themselves only when they want to, and when they don't want to, they don't. Most people are guided by their intellect and their emotions, and their primary concern is to satisfy their own flesh. Many communicate with the Lord through their mind and emotions. Few communicate with Him through their will. It is easy to find believers who value the doctrines of the Bible. If you explain Matthew 24 or Revelation well to them, they are happy to listen to such messages. It does not require much effort to listen to a message that does not require us to pay any price. After listening to a good message, they go home happy, but nothing more happens. Others have sensitive emotions. They are always active in working for the Lord. These people are better than those who are insensitive, but they are as unstable as the waves of the sea. They may prepare a message with great zeal. After sharing the message, they may secretly think in their hearts how good their message was and how many people were moved. They may be so joyful that they cannot sleep all night. Many people cannot sleep because of pain, but these cannot sleep because of joy. These people are pleased with the activities of the flesh. Although they are serving the Lord outwardly, in reality they are satisfying themselves. They have not fully given their will to the Lord. They must wholeheartedly consecrate their will to the Lord and be disciplined by Him. Before offering any valid service to the Lord, they must allow Him to guide their mind and emotion, so that they will not be ruled by an active mind or driven by their emotions. Requirements to know the will of God. I do not like to hear people ask how to know God's will. We should all have a clear answer to this question by now. God's will is only revealed to those who have committed their will to Him. God does not force us to do anything, for He always expects us to be willing. Knowing God's will is not as important as being willing to do it. We have to say to the Lord, "Not my will, but yours, be done." When we put aside ourself, we will know God's will. Once at a sisters' meeting in Hangzhou, two sisters asked me whether God's will was based on circumstances, the Bible, or other principles. Hearing this, I was greatly distressed, and I answered them sternly, though there was no harshness in my heart, knowing God's will is not a matter of methods. You can have the best methods, and apply them in detail, step by step, but you will still not know God's will. As I spoke, my eyes were fixed on the two sisters. So I asked them, "What kind of people are you?" A person's knowledge of God's will is up to the person themselves. If the person is not upright, the method will not produce any results. Can God reveal His will to people like you? You do not need to ask many questions. You do not need to ask God for methods. God can reveal His will in many ways. He can reveal it through the wind, through thunder, through a child, or through a donkey. You only need to ask yourselves whether people like you are fit to know God's will. In Genesis 18, when God was about to destroy the city of Sodom, He went to Abraham, for He could not hide from him what He was going to do. Abraham was a friend of God. He was not God's slave, for a slave does not know what his master is doing, only a friend knows the mind of a friend. John 15 verse 15. There were no barriers between Abraham and God, and so God could not hide what He was going to do. Lot was a relative of Abraham. He may have had much spiritual knowledge, but God did not speak to him. He only spoke to Abraham. It would be very strange if Lot came to me and asked, "How can I know God's will?" Abraham was qualified to know God's will, but Lot was not. It would be useless for Lot to know what God's will was. Lot would still be Lot. Who are you, Abraham or Lot? Many people only pay attention to the methods of knowing God's will. It is necessary to know the methods, but we must be like Abraham to understand them. If you are someone like Lot, who is learning, these methods, even if they are the best, will be of no use, because he is a person living in the world. He has not put an end to his relationship with the world or to his position in it. We need to apply God's light to see if there are any sins in us, whether great or small. Have we committed any injustice? Do we owe anything to anyone? Have we been negligent in our behavior, or have we been wrong in our words, gestures, or attitudes? We're still clinging to something. All these sins, great and small, affect our ability to know God's will. The starting point for knowing God's will. A consecration unconditional. Concerning knowing God's will, Paul said that we should not be foolish, but should understand what the will of the Lord is, Ephesians 5 verse 17. There is a starting point to knowing God's will, and there is a continuation to it. If you don't have the proper beginning, you cannot know God's will. But even if you have a good beginning, if you are not the right person, you will still not know God's will. Have you ever in your life devoted yourself wholeheartedly to the Lord? I don't mean dedicating yourself to being a preacher, but rather devoting yourself to the Lord to do His will. You don't need to worry about God's will, you just need to sincerely devote yourself. You must understand that you need a direct relationship with God's will, and this must not be affected by the brothers. If the Lord wants me to go to the east, I will go to the east. I will not be affected by the opinions of any person, thing, or circumstance. Even so, my eyes will not be on the east, but on God Himself. The danger among God's workers is that they can make the work the focus of their attention. We cannot develop any attachment to the work, or to people, or to circumstances. We must relate directly to God and set our eyes exclusively on Him. The 7 spirits of revelation are sent out throughout the earth, but they have no relationship with the earth. These 7 spirits are before the throne of God, and they relate only to God. We must fully consecrate ourselves to God at least once in order to carry out His will. This is the starting point in our knowledge of God's will. Without this starting point, we will never be able to understand God's will properly. The continuation, in knowing the will of God. Eliminating all obstacles. The starting point for knowing God's will is unconditional dedication. But if one wishes to advance in God's will, one must remove all obstacles. If one is obstinate, envious, proud, or has small problems of a similar nature, one is spiritually ill and will not be able to know God's will. If you wish to prevent your ear from hearing something, you do not need to cover it with a rod or a desk, a small finger will suffice. The same principle applies to knowing God's will. A small obstacle will be enough to prevent us from knowing His will. I was once taking a walk with Miss Barber in a garden. After a while we grew tired and sat down on chairs under a tree. She said, "There is a bright star in the sky, but I cannot see it because a leaf is blocking my view." Brother Nate, if someone were to come to me and tell me about the many ways to see the star, I would not be able to see it even if the observation methods you suggested were very good. The reason is that I am not in the right position, I am standing in the wrong place. The words she spoke to me on that occasion are still fresh in my mind. She explained to me that a small leaf can block us from seeing the light of a huge star. Very small things often obscure God's will. If after seeking God's will many times you do not gain a clear vision, the solution is not to change your method, but to change your person. If you find that you cannot know God's will, this indicates that something is standing between you and God. It may be that God has already spoken to you and you have been unwilling to obey Him. You must remove these obstacles. Once you have put an end to these problems, you will know God's will. To know God's will, we must pay attention to the person rather than the methods. The way of knowing God's will varies from one person to another. One method may not apply to all people. David volunteered to fight Goliath, and Saul lent him his armor. But it did not fit him properly and he could not walk in it, so he decided to take it off. 1 Samuel 17 verses 32 and 38, 39. One time when I was in Shanghai, I gave my coat to Brother Luck, and it was too small for him. He was not very comfortable in the coat, because it did not fit him properly. We can only wear something that is our size. Because of the different conditions of man, God has appointed different ways for man to know Him. Some can know Him with relative ease, but for others it is very difficult. In any case, God has a way for man to know His will. Therefore, we should not try to learn any method. What we need to do is to dedicate ourselves to the Lord, remove obstacles, and maintain a personal relationship with Him. Those who work for God must know His will. I have often offended many brothers. When they ask me how to know God's will, I always answer that I do not like such questions. What a blessing it would be if we could consecrate ourselves completely to the Lord to know His will. What are we? Although the Earth, the solar system, and the universe are so vast and immeasurable, they can never compare with the will of God. How glorious it is that a sinner, a man of dust, can know the will of God. Once a man comes to know the will of God, he becomes superior to a mere creature. This is the goal of the New Testament. Those who do not know the will of God are not even fit to be called Christians, and they are wasting God's provisions. Those who do not know the will of God cannot work for God. If a servant does not know his master's desire, how can he be a servant? An unbeliever may not have knowledge of God's will, but it is inexcusable that we do not know his will. A Christian must first of all be a friend of Christ, one who knows his will, before becoming his slave, one who serves him. We need to ask ourselves the question, we friends of Christ? Of the Lord, is there any barrier between him and us? Do we know his will? Only after we have become his friends, can we become his slaves and work for him. End of this wonderful audio book.